Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to 10 lectures of the CBRL Graduate Network Development Seminar Series. This is part of our ongoing monthly series where we bring together distinguished scholars and expertise from both Jordan and UK to share with us their experience for research journey and methods. So today's session titled Turning Your Thesis into Journal Articles will be presented by Dr. Sarah Irving. In this lecture, Dr. Sarah will tell us about early career scholar and what they have often under the pressure to publish quickly to build their CV for postdoctoral and job applications. Will set turning your thesis into a book is an important project for many, drawing and doctoral research as the basis for articles is often a good basis for journal articles too. This event will explore some does or doesn't of this process. Now let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Sarah Irving. She is Associate Professor of Modern Middle Eastern History at the University of Staffordshire and editor of the CBRL journal Contemporary Levant, and author of over 30 journals articles and books chapters, those of which come from her master's degree and PhD research. Before we give Dr. Sarah the mic, give me say this quick note. Today's session is being recorded, and as part of our webinar format, we kindly ask everyone to submit any question you may have using Q&A box. Dr. Sarah will be happy to address those questions at the end of the talk. Thank you for joining us today, and Dr. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And is the slideshow now showing properly?
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay. Hello out there. It's always weird speaking to a computer screen and knowing that there's someone behind you, behind it. Okay, so this is very much a session that is about academic skills. I'm going to give an outline of some of the things that need to be thought about if you're looking at turning parts of your dissertation into journal articles or indeed book chapters. I'm also going to talk about some of the pitfalls and the problems to avoid. But obviously I can only kind of speak quite generally to these things. So I very much hope that some of you will ask questions about your own examples, your own cases, because those will be really useful for everybody else to hear about and to learn from. So you don't need to wait till the end to add questions to the Q&A section. You can do that at any time during my talk. So if anything kind of sets off a question in your head, please do write that down at the time. Okay, so and I'm hoping that there will be. I was told to speak for just over an hour. I suspect that it's not going to take quite that long. I'm hoping that there's going to be a bit more time for Q&A at the end, because as I said, this is very much a sort of skills, professional skills kind of talk, and as I said, it's your situations and your specific needs that are the sort of most important angle on that. Okay, so particularly I think for people in humanities and social sciences, but also in some other disciplines as well, there is often a sort of a pressure in in your head during your PhD to publish as a book. If you've got good supervisors, then hopefully they will have that in their heads from the beginning of the process, and you can shape a PhD in a way that will make transforming it into a book reasonably easy, or at least less complicated than it needs to be. But whatever happens, whatever kind of format you choose, you are going to have to rewrite sections of a PhD thesis by definition in order to make them publishable. The advantages of doing this using articles is that these will often give you a much quicker turnaround than a book. If you are going through the sort of British or American academic publishing process, you can very likely, between sending your proposal to the publisher, the time from that point until the time when your book actually comes out, you might well be looking at least 2 years. Sometimes you might be able to do that a bit quicker if the reviewers very much like what you've sent, if it's very much ready to go as a book format. If you've made those changes that make it more readable and things like that. But the shortest that you're probably looking at is about 18 months, and it's likely to be quite a lot more. So journal articles can often be a quicker turnaround than books. It's also often, if you are post-PhD and you are in, for instance, short-term teaching or research jobs, it's often a lot easier to work on articles or chapters than it is to be working on an entire book project. If there are people in the audience here who are early career researchers in this kind of job, then you'll know what I mean. That, if you're in the kind of job that many of us go into straight from our PhDs, where, for instance, you're replacing an established academic who has gone on research leave, who has got grant funding in order to do some research, and you're doing suddenly all of their teaching. You've got only maybe a few weeks to prepare it. You're dealing with large numbers of students. You're potentially dealing with topics that you're not particularly familiar with. Then trying to work on your publications on top of that can be a real challenge. And working on an article, something that's maybe 8,000 words plus or minus, is something that is a lot more feasible to fit in than working on an entire book manuscript. And what taking these somewhat quicker approaches can do is allow you to build a publications list more quickly. That will mean that when you are then applying for jobs and grants, or indeed writing book proposals for a full book manuscript, you've got a much more solid CV. I know, for instance, that a few years ago, it was reported that people who got 3-year postdocs from the Australian Arts and Humanities postdoc funding scheme had an average of 12 publications already under their belt. And that's for people who, by definition, were fairly early career researchers. So there's a huge pressure career-wise to get publications out. And articles can be one of the quicker ways of doing that. Alongside articles, it is also worth considering chapters in edited volumes, so edited books. If you want to go down this route, it's worth keeping an eye on listservs. So, for instance, in my field, in Middle Eastern history, I'm on various listservs on the HNet system. And if you're not already signed up to HNet, it's worth getting on there. If you work on any aspect of the Middle East, it's also worth being signed up to UMES, EUMES, which is a German-hosted weekly listserv that sends out calls for papers, job adverts, postdoc adverts, all sorts of that kind of thing. And also social media, getting onto particularly Blue Sky is very much used by academics now, and keeping an eye out for people who are calling for contributions for edited volumes. Um, getting 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 involved in an edited volume can also often be a really good way of building new networks and contacts because not in all cases, but in at least some cases, editors of edited volumes will try and create a sort of small community of the people who are contributing to their book. They might well communicate with the authors contributing as a group. They might even try to get funding to run workshops and things like that. So it can be a good way of making new contacts in your field. And because the editors of the books might well be in different countries to you, or they might be in sort of slightly different positions in terms of disciplines, it can be a good way of reaching new readers for you and reaching out, for instance, in sort of sub-disciplines that you aren't currently recognized in. But what is also worth bearing in mind is that these are books. So again, they go through the book publishing process, and often that means that they may well take longer to come out than a journal article. I, for instance, have got a chapter in a book that came out last year, that was from a workshop that I attended in 2019. So they can take quite a long time. But it's always worth considering them, finding out what plans are, how advanced the editors are in terms of their dealings with publishers and those kind of questions. But it's always there as a possibility. Um, Broadly speaking, and these things can apply to both articles and chapters, is that there are kind of some broader benefits that you can think about in terms of why publishing articles from your PhD can not just be a good thing in terms of career moves and building a CV, but also in terms of kind of wider academic and writing goals and thoughts for yourself. So thinking about your PhD dissertation and then considering how you might want to remove material from it, draw material from it that will be useful for articles, is also an opportunity to think creatively about the material from your PhD. It's a chance to think about whether there are questions that you didn't have time to properly address in your thesis. Are there aspects of current events or issues that you can respond to using your material? So it's not possible to just pull a chapter from your PhD and turn and it becomes an article. You will have to change them. So you can think in quite creative ways if you want about how you want to do that changing, what you might want to revise in the light of your later thinking, in the light maybe of the discussions that you had in your viva, all of those sorts of things. Um, if you are thinking of several different articles from a PhD thesis, it's also a chance um, to be quite strategic about broadening your reach, broadening the academic communities that you are engaging with, um, by thinking about which journals to publish in. So, for instance, I'm a historian of the Middle East. That means that I can look at history journals and I can look at area studies journals. And I will probably reach different audiences depending on where I publish. So, for instance, one of the things that I work on is using archives that tell us something about the experience of indigenous Palestinians who were manual laborers on archaeological sites to tell us about Palestinian social history in the late Ottoman and Mandate periods, and to think about where they fit into Palestinian labor history, and social history more generally. And some of the things that I've written have been published in journals that are very much aimed at Middle East and Palestinian studies, so things like Journal of Palestine Studies and Jerusalem Quarterly. But I've also published material from that work in journals like the European Review of History, and the Bulletin of the History of Archaeology. And that means that I have readers who are in Palestine studies, and I have readers who are in, for instance, history of archaeology. I was exchanging emails the other day with somebody who works on archaeological labor in Mexico, in colonial Mexico. So you can look at what you have in your PhD and think about whether there are a range of different types of journals, subjects of journal that you can send work to. And by doing that, you potentially make yourself known or make yourself interesting to a range of different academic departments if you're applying to them for jobs and that kind of thing. In the same sort of way, you can do things like targeting specific regions. So if you are particularly wanting to try and get a job or a postdoc in, say, Europe or China or the Americas, to think of sort of three major regions where people go for postdoctoral postdoctoral positions or early career jobs, then aiming at journals in those regions can help to raise your profile amongst the sorts of departments that you might be applying to. So just having that kind of strategic way of thinking about where to send your work and the sort of range of different journals that you might want to consider when you're deciding what to do with parts of a PhD thesis. Um, Something I've come across quite often from PhD students and ECRs is the idea that you can't publish your chapters because you want to publish it as a book. These are all photographs of the acknowledgement sections of books. They're from my personal library, so they're all history books. Uh, Three of them are Middle East history books. One of them is an environmental history book about North America's tallgrass prairie borderlands, which is much more interesting than it might sound. And as you can see, all of these acknowledgement sections mention that they have published parts of chapters, that some of their chapters are almost based around articles they had previously written. Sometimes they have even included translations of articles that they have published elsewhere. So we've got in the top left, this is from a book on science in 18th and 19th century Egypt. And as this says, parts of chapters 2 and 3 were previously published in an article in the International Journal of Middle East Studies. Top right is from Ilana Feldman's book on looking at Palestinians who worked in the British Mandate government civil service, particularly Palestinians living in Gaza. And again, as she says, some of the ideas explored in this book were first published in my article Everyday Government in Extraordinary Times, Persistence and Authority in Gaza's Civil Service. Bottom left is from a very, so both, and in both of those cases, the first example is from somebody where this book is based on their PhD. I think the Gaza one, I think it wasn't her first book. She had published others before. Um, the bottom left one is from a very established scholar. This is from Salim Tamari, the Palestinian social historian, classic volume, Mountain Against the Sea. And as you can see, a number of these were articles or versions of articles, sometimes published in English, one published in French, one in Arabic, and then translated to English for the book. And then the final one, I think, again, this is a PhD thesis based book. And as you can see, a number of parts of this book had been published as journals, as journal articles before they became parts of the book. So this is not something you need to worry about. It is pretty standard practice in academic publishing for academic books, especially early ones, to include sections that have been published as journal articles. Now, obviously, it's not going to be identical. You are going to, you're going to need to change some aspects of it because what goes into a journal article is different from what goes into a book chapter. But the point is that it's not one or the other. It is entirely legitimate and possible to use sections of your thesis as the basis for journal articles to start off with, and to then revise them during the process of turning the rest of the thesis into a book. Indeed, having those articles will very likely be useful in when you're writing the proposal for a book because it shows the editors at a publisher, at a book publisher, that you can publish in the academic world. You can go through the peer review process, that other scholars respect your work because they have agreed in the peer review process that your work is worth publishing. And the people making the decisions at a book publishers can see that you have the discipline and the application to go about the process of turning your work and turning your research into publishable material. So it will very much boost your CV and boost your book proposal if you've already got journal articles out there. So how to actually go about the process of doing this? The first thing that you need to do is realize that you can't just take a PhD chapter and use it as a journal article. A journal article, if you think about it, needs to have a question of its own. It needs to have a focus of its own and an argument of its own. So you're going to need to take that material from your PhD and refine the argument so that it functions as a standalone article. So you need to be looking at your PhD, thinking about which sections are strong in terms of the kind of argument that you can make about them, that the empirical material that's there is interesting, that it will grab a journal editor's attention, that it will make a genuine contribution to the existing literature, and that it addresses a real gap in the existing literature. If you aren't sure and confident about making those decisions, talk to your previous your former supervisors. If you have other mentors in academia, talk to them. Um, Talk to your Viva examiners. It's entirely normal, certainly within the European system and the British system, for your Viva examiners, and indeed in the US system, for your Viva examiners to be somebody that you should be staying in contact with, if that's useful, after the Viva. They should be people who can be writing references for you and who can be helping you to think about how you might turn sections of your PhD into publications. You might also want to consider presenting your material at conferences or workshops. It doesn't have to be something big and international. It can just be, for instance, a department research seminar or something like this. But these are always good opportunities to get feedback, to get questions, to be asked questions about what's in your work. To see how other people respond to its contents. And all of those should be useful things in terms of refining your content and refining your argument, and potentially, finding people who can recommend other things that you might want to read that you hadn't already heard about, or who might be able to talk to you about theorists that you hadn't been aware of, or whose work you hadn't thought of as being relevant, and all of those sorts of ideas. Um, so, and this is something that doesn't just apply, of course, to PhD material. I always, if I'm doing a new piece of research, one of the things I always try to do from quite early on, as soon as I've got a sort of um, a reasonable bunch of material, is I start trying to find places where I can present it to audiences in order to get those sorts of questions and reactions. And it's very, it's quite common to be able to find places where you can present work in progress material. And again, if you think about the sorts of listservs that I was talking about earlier, or if you, again, as I mentioned, Blue Sky can be very useful for following fellow academics. There are a lot of places, including lots of online opportunities, working on Zoom or Teams, where you may be able to present or discuss work in progress articles or papers in order to just get those other perspectives and other viewpoints on your work. As I've mentioned a bunch of times, you won't be able to just take a chapter directly and send it off to be published as a journal article. You will need to provide uh, a much more focused argument than is likely in a lot of PhD chapters. It's also very possible that you might need to take material from more than one chapter. The logic of how a set of PhD chapters fit together won't necessarily follow the same logic in of how you will get across the argument in an article. So just to go back to the first one of these that I mentioned, the one in the top left, parts of chapters 2 and 3 were previously published in an article. And you can kind of flip that on its head, that parts of two different chapters might end up being parts of the same article. It's also possible that things that you didn't manage to fit into the final dissertation because they weren't completely relevant to the argument are still useful and still interesting and can still be used in publications. I think it's one of the benefits really of writing something as long as a PhD is that is that even if there are things that you have to chop out, you should never regard that as waste or wasted time for researching and writing it, because something chopped out of a PhD is very often something that you can then turn into a publication in another way. As I said, one of the things that you'll almost be guaranteed to need to do if you are adapting a PhD chapter is to restructure your material to build up an argument. If you think about a PhD chapter, often it derives part of its argument, part of its logic from the rest of the PhD, from the chapters before and after it, from the introduction of your PhD, where you've presented your main thesis, your main argument. And so you're going to have to bring some of that material that's from other places into the chapter in order to create an article that's got a strong enough argument and a strong enough focus to work as an article on its own. You may well need to also do things like clarify bits of the data, bits of the historical flow, bits of the empirical sections, because again, a thesis chapter is, you know, obviously deeply integrated into the overall dissertation. It can refer to other chapters in a way that a journal article can't. So you need to be able to include sections that make what's in the article clear to a reader. In order to build up that structure and argument, you're probably going to need to strengthen your introduction and conclusion. The sorts of introduction and conclusion that work in a chapter, as I said, are often quite dependent on other sections of the thesis, especially the intro and the conclusion. So you're going to need to build those up and possibly add a bit more in terms of things like the theoretical approach, the methodological approach, and the overall thesis. And you may well also need to introduce some discussion of the literature that you are addressing in your article, because again, in a thesis, you're probably going to have had a whole literature review section that justifies the point of your thesis, that locates it in relation to the existing scholarly literature, that talks about what is in the existing scholarly literature and where the gap is that you're addressing. And you'll need to do a sort of mini version of that in the article in order that your readers see why the article is worth reading, what it is that it contributes to the scholarship, what is new about it, what it tells us about the subject that other scholars haven't already said. So these are all things that you may well have to add in order to turn a chapter from your PhD into an article. Now, as I said at the beginning, to some extent, I'm having to give quite a general um, overview of the kind of skills that we're talking about here. Um, uh, Different people will be publishing in very different disciplines, in different journals. Not everybody will have to do all of the things on this list here, but it is likely that everybody will have to do at least some of them. And you will certainly do well to consider all of them and to think about whether your article already ticks these boxes, or whether there are things that you need to add to it. Another thing that you need to bear in mind if you've been doing a PhD for several years especially if you've been doing a part-time PhD, but even if you've done a sort of 3 or 4 year PhD, is that some of the research that you've done might well be several years old. And there may well be ideas and findings that you haven't noticed because you've been busy writing your PhD. Possibly even you've been busy teaching or working to support yourself or whatever. So one of the things that's also important when you're writing an article from a PhD chapter is to bring that work back up to date. You need to do a scan of new journal articles in your field, check the major journals, check major disciplinary journals, do keyword searches on the subject of your article to make sure that if something has been published while you were working on your PhD, or while you were working on your revisions, that you include it, that you don't end up with a journal editor or a peer reviewer just sending it back to you going, oh, you need to read such and such an article because they've already said this, or because they might uh, mean that you need to take a different interpretation of some of your material. If you're using a lot of theory, make sure that you are checking new developments in that theory, or work that has been written by major theorists that you are talking about, in order again to make sure that you are up to date with the approaches that you're using. Or if you're using a more empirical material, again, make sure that there aren't discoveries out there that you have somehow missed, that will change how you should be interpreting your own materials. Um, it might seem annoying, but this is the kind of thing that peer reviewers at a journal may well send your work back for revision or even reject it because of. Some of the things I'm gonna say now are um, things that are applicable generally to the journal article publishing process, but some of them are particularly relevant to early career researchers and adaptations of PhDs. So firstly, always take some time to identify the right journal for your article. If so, as Rodina mentioned at the beginning of this session, I'm the editor of one of CBRL's journals, Contemporary Levant, and I receive a lot, not huge amounts, but quite a lot of articles that simply are not relevant to the journal. And that can be in different ways. Sometimes I get sent articles that are simply outside the geographical remit of the journal. Journal is called Contemporary Levant, so we cover, roughly speaking, Bilad Sham, or historical Greater Syria plus Cyprus. What are now modern day Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Israel, and Cyprus, and the diasporas of those countries and the relationships that those countries have, for instance, with the international community or with, say, international literature or something like this, or depictions of these by other people from other cultures and other countries. Periodically, however, I might get an article about Tunisia or Morocco, and if the person who had sent me that had read the information about the journal, they wouldn't have sent me it, and that means that they could have sent it to a more relevant journal, and they would be further along the process of finding out whether they were going to get peer reviewed and then published. Um, that's one of the easy things to spot. Um, Other things that you need to consider are also questions of, for instance, discipline. So what people also sometimes send me at Contemporary Levant, which I will just turn down, is articles where the approach of the article is not right for an area studies article. So, for instance, I received what I'm sure was a very good article recently, but it was very much a linguistics article. It was very technical. It was on Jordanian linguistics, but because it was extremely technical on linguistics, it would not have been something that people interested in the Levant more generally would have been able to understand or would have found useful. So it's fine to send a journal, an article to me that uses linguistic theory and uses linguistic approaches, but it needs to be an article that tells a historian of Jordan or someone who's interested in Jordanian politics or literature something that they will find useful. The conclusion needs to be about Jordan, not about linguistics. And what this article had done, and it was why I wrote back to them and said, I can't take this further for peer review in its current form. What they had very much done is they were using Jordanian material to answer a linguistics question. And what that meant was that the outcome of that article, and therefore most of the discussion in it, was either too technical or just not interesting to a more general scholar of the region. They could have used the same material to write something where they used the linguistic approach to tell us something about Jordanian political discourse, and that would have been interesting. So it's understanding what it is that a specific journal is doing, who is likely to read it, and whether what you are writing might be interesting to those readers. Um, and that should help you to pick the right journal. And because if you don't pick the right journal, the likelihood is you are just going to get an email back saying this isn't right for this journal, which means you've wasted your time, the editor's time, and because it might, for instance, take them a week or two to get around to looking at your article and sending that email, you've also lost that time. Whereas if you'd sent it to the right journal, they might already be sending it to peer reviewers. So that's the kind of thing you need to bear when you're trying to find the right journal. Um, if you want your work to be easily accessed by other people, then it is worth trying to find what are known as diamond open access titles. Open access, it comes under different headings, and if you go to traditional journals, um, what are known as gold open access or green open access, then you have to pay uh, what is, quite frankly, in many cases, ridiculous amounts of money to publish your article open access. If it's not open access, it will still be available to most scholars, but it won't be available to people who can't afford to, or whose universities can't afford to subscribe to that particular publisher, or to people more generally. So especially if you are also wanting to, for instance, make a political point, or engage with community debates, and so you want your article to be more easily accessible, then it is worth trying to find what are known as diamond open access journals. And what that means is that they are both open access to the reader, so they are free for people to read, and they are free to publish in. And this is usually possible for two reasons. One is that they have no, sorry, three reasons. One is that they have an organization with money behind them. So, for instance, a scholarly organization who pays for the journal. So that's one possibility. Second is that in some countries, because academic cultures are very different in different countries, so France is a good example of this, it is very normal for universities to have online, free to publish, free to read journals. They don't always have the best quality editing and proofing processes, but then to be honest, sometimes neither do the really expensive big uh, academic journals nowadays as well. And then thirdly, is that there is now something that happens amongst some of the um, big publishing companies where they do what is called flipping a journal. And that is when, if they publish enough articles that have been paid for by universities to be open access, they make everything that they publish that year open access. And this is another reason why it can be worth getting onto places like Blue Sky in order to keep an eye on journal uh, journal profiles and journals announcing or keeping an eye on journal publishers. So, for instance, Cambridge University Press journal publishers might have its own separate Blue Sky account. Because they will often announce it publicly when they flip to open access for that year. So it is worth trying to track down a good journal that is in Diamond Open Access mode. Um, as I've said, consider who you want to read your work in terms of scholarship and careers, and also in terms of things like, as I said, if you want to make what you are writing politically relevant or useful for the community that you're writing about, and all of these sorts of things, then that is something that you want to feed into the process of thinking about journals. Another thing which surprisingly few people do when they send articles, certainly in my experience at Contemporary Levant, is make sure you revise your article, revise your PhD chapter to turn it into an article to meet the journal's standards and format. Go to the journal's homepage, find the instructions for editors, and make sure you follow those instructions. And that means using things like the right kind of references, spelling, the right kind, especially if you are working with Arabic or indeed any language that uses non-Western alphabets, then make sure that you see what type of transliteration that journal uses. Some journal editors, if you send them stuff with, say, the wrong referencing system, might be quite tolerant and are willing to send it to peer review so that you don't have to change it to their referencing system until they know that they're going to accept it. But especially at the more established journals, most of them will just send your article back. They will just reject it at the desk stage. It won't even get to peer review. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be clear that you have tried to follow the instructions. Everybody makes some mistakes. But what's annoying as a journal editor is to get articles where people clearly haven't even remotely bothered to try and follow the instructions, because that is disrespectful of your time and your peer reviewer's time. Uh, and the person, you don't want to annoy the journal editor because they are the gatekeeper as to whether or not you are going to get even as far as peer review. Uh, these are all, I'm going to finish off with just two slides on on kind of a warning. And that is because there are a lot of things called predatory journals out there. and they particularly target uh, early career researchers. So if you've already got your PhD, especially if you have published anything already, or if you have given presentation at a conference, then you will probably already have started receiving emails from predatory publishers. Now, these are journals which are of extremely poor quality. They may well publish material that is just AI generated. They may well publish material that is simply that is plagiarized, that is fake, that is just simply not of any kind of scholarly use. And quite often they will charge money to desperate early career researchers for doing that publishing. And many of these market themselves very aggressively to early career researchers. They will often do things like promise fast turnaround times. They will promise that your work will be peer reviewed and published in a month or 2 months or something like this. No journal can guarantee quality peer review in that kind of time, because the people doing the peer reviewing are also lecturing and writing their own work and sitting on university committees and marking and doing all of those things, which means that very often finding good peer reviewers and then giving them the time to do good peer review will take months. Publishing in a predatory journal, though, is a waste of your material, because if it's good material, you want it to go in a journal that people will respect. It's also a waste of your effort, because an article in a predatory journal, if you put it on your CV, to be honest, it is worse than having no article, because it suggests that you are trying to claim that you've got publication when actually it's probably gone through no peer review or very little peer review. And it's a journal that has very low standards in terms of what it accepts and what it rejects. So if you are getting emails from journals that offer you things like quick turnaround, be very wary of them. There are other ways of spotting journals that are predatory. Often they have very broad, vague titles. They're often called things like Journal of Arts and Humanities or Journal of Sciences, or something like that. There are very few journals that are that broad that are any good. They will also be charging just for publication, and you should never pay just for publication. You should only pay what is called an article processing charge, or ask your university to pay an article processing charge if it is for open access publishing, for green or gold open access publishing. You should never pay just to publish. If you're not sure, you can Google something called Beale's List, which is a website that was compiled by a librarian at a US university, of predatory journals and journal publishers, that you should just avoid everything that they publish. So, for instance, there is one of the sort of biggest and best known predatory journal publishers is called MDPI, and any email from one of their journals should be deleted. Predatory journals will often try to disguise themselves. They will literally find the names of professors in the field that they are publishing in and claim that these people have agreed to be on their editorial committee. Very often, these people will never even have heard of the journal and have nothing to do with it. So, if you're wondering, if you're looking at a journal and you're not quite sure, one of the things that you can do is email people on the editorial board and say, is this legit? Are you actually on this board? Are you involved in this journal? Um, but keeping an eye out for predatory journals is something that you is very much worth doing, especially at the beginning of your career, because as I said, they market themselves aggressively to people at the beginning of their careers. They often can be very tempting in the things that they offer. There are also predatory book publishers. So, for instance, there's a notorious one in Britain called Cambridge Scholars Publishing. It's got Cambridge in the name, so people think it sounds, reputable, but it's not. It's actually based in a completely different part of the country. And so, for instance, if you organize a workshop or a little conference or something, quite often in Britain, you will end up with an email in your inbox from Cambridge Scholars Publishing going, oh, we saw the website or the announcement for your conference. Would you like to publish the conference proceedings with us? And the answer has to be no, because again, they charge money for you to do it and they don't provide genuine scholarly backup. Um, and so just finally, I took this from my spam box today on my email address, just as an example of some of the characteristics that you will find. Now, this isn't from a predatory journal. This is from another thing that you need to be aware of and keep your eye out for, which is a predatory conference. And again, these are not uncommon. They usually charge money to attend. And there are particular ways that you can kind of keep an eye out in order to spot them. One is that, and predatory journals will do this as well, is that they will try and make you hurry. And so they will try and make you make a bad decision by pushing you by saying that there's a tight deadline. So what you'll often see from predatory journals is you'll get emails saying things like, "Oh, we've got almost a whole issue put together, but we just need one more article to fill it up. And if you can send us this in the next week, we'll give you money off. We'll make it cheaper for you to publish with us." That's a very common tactic they use. We've got a similar thing here. They're trying to make possible participants panic by saying, "Oh, you've got to get this in by tomorrow." However, if we look at this, this is just something that came into my inbox yesterday, but it is saying it's just looking for abstracts for a conference that's happening at the end of next month. No big international conference can organize all of its participants, can choose from the abstracts, can decide which ones are good, can help people to make the necessary visa and travel and accommodation arrangements in less than 2 months. So you can, if you're getting something where the turnaround is that tight, and again this applies with journals, then it's probably predatory. It's probably fake. Um, and then you can do things like look up. Again, you've got this thing of academic members responsible for the conference. So if you look these up, you'll discover that Dr. Robert Bishop of Wheaton College, USA, is actually a physicist. And he works on the relationship between physics and philosophy, but he does not work on religion and theology. He probably knows nothing about this conference, but they have probably used AI to find a couple of names of people in America, so they will probably never hear about this conference in Athens that claimed to be associated with them. And they've just stuck the names on. The other guy is a bit more kind of associated with religious studies, but only a bit. So these are the kind of ways in which you can spot these kind of things. A final one is that, I mean, I don't work on religion and theology. Any reputable person running a conference who wants to invite me to submit to it, firstly, they will write Dear Sarah or Dear Dr. Irving. They won't write Dear Colleague. Um, and they will be asking me to things that are actually relevant to what I work in. Religion and theology maybe could be forgiven, but I regularly get articles asking me to submit journal articles or participate in conferences on things like engineering or mechanics or medicine, none of which I have anything to do with. And therefore, why would you want to go to a conference at which I was speaking when I know nothing to do with it? It's obviously fake. It's obviously just trying to get you to send, $300 conference fee. So those are just sort of some of the techniques that you can use to avoid predatory journals. And as I said, that's not something that is specific to the question of adapting a PhD. It is very much something that is relevant for all article publishing and more broadly in terms of kind of elements of career.